Welcome back. You're safe here. Let the day fall away. Tonight a story will unfold, not to stir you, but to settle you. Whether it's a whisper from a forgotten soul, a tale from a time long past, or a dream that never truly ended, close your eyes and let the story guide you home. The desert stretched endless under a sky bruised with dusk, its amber glow fading into the cool kiss of night. Sagebrush whispered secrets to the wind, and somewhere beyond the horizon, the town of Red Hollow slept uneasily. It was 1887, and in this forgotten corner of the West, time seemed to hold its breath. At the edge of town, where the last lantern flickered, stood a weathered boarding house, its wooden bones creaking under the weight of stories no one dared tell. Inside, a young woman named Clara Everett unpacked her single suitcase, her fingers trembling as they brushed against a small, tarnished locket. Clara was 23, with eyes like storm clouds and hair the color of winter wheat. She'd come to Red Hollow chasing a promise, a teaching position at the town's only schoolhouse. Her father had been a prospector, her mother a seamstress, both gone now, taken by fever 3 years back. The locket was her mother's last gift, a peculiar thing with no clasp, its surface etched with a crescent moon. "It opens when it's ready," her mother had whispered, cryptic to the end. Clara had laughed it off then, but now, alone in a strange town, the weight of it around her neck felt like a question she couldn't answer. The boarding house was run by Widow Hargrove, a sharp-eyed woman whose smile never quite reached her eyes. "You'll find Red Hollow quiet," she said, handing Clara a key to a room upstairs. "Folks keep to themselves. Best you do the same." Clara nodded, though the warning hung heavy. Her room was small, with a single window overlooking the desert. The bed sagged, the air smelled of dust, and the silence was so thick it seemed to hum. She sat on the edge of the mattress, the locket cool against her skin, and tried to shake the feeling that something was watching her. That night, sleep came fitfully. Dreams wove through her mind, flashes of a woman in white, her face blurred, standing in a field of stars. The woman held the locket, her lips moving without sound. Clara woke with a start, her heart pounding. The room was dark, save for a sliver of moonlight cutting through the curtains. She reached for the locket, half expecting it to feel different, but it was the same cold metal. Then she heard it a faint click, like a key turning in a lock. Her breath caught. The sound hadn't come from the door. It came from the locket. She fumbled for the oil lamp, her fingers clumsy in the dark. The flame sputtered to life, casting shadows that danced like ghosts on the walls. The locket lay still in her palm, unchanged, its surface glinting faintly. She traced the crescent moon with her thumb, her pulse racing. Had she imagined it? The house was silent now, but the air felt heavier, as if someone had just left the room. Clara told herself it was Nerve's new town, new life, the weight of being alone. But as she set the locket on the bedside table, she couldn't shake the sense that it was waiting for something. Morning brought no answers. Red Hollow woke slowly, its streets dusty and sparse. The schoolhouse was a squat building at the town's heart, its paint peeling like old skin. Clara's students were a handful of children, their faces smudged with dirt and curiosity. They whispered about her when they thought she couldn't hear, about the city girl with the fancy locket, about how she wouldn't last long. One boy, a wiry kid named Tommy with eyes too old for his 10 years, stared at her neck longer than the others. "That's a strange one," he said, pointing at the locket. "Looks like something my ma used to talk about. Said things like that hold secrets." Clara forced a smile. "It's just a keepsake," she said, tucking it under her collar. Tommy didn't look convinced, but he didn't press. The day passed in a blur of lessons, arithmetic, reading, the scratch of chalk on slate. Yet all through it, Clara felt the locket's weight, heavier than it should be. By afternoon, the desert heat pressed against the windows, and her thoughts drifted to the click she'd heard in the night. She dismissed the class early, blaming the heat, and stood alone in the empty schoolhouse, her fingers grazing the locket again. Back at the boarding house, Widow Hargrove was sweeping the porch, her movements sharp and deliberate. "You look pale, Miss Everett," she said, not looking up. "Desert air takes some getting used to." Clara murmured agreement, but her mind was elsewhere. She climbed the stairs to her room, the locket swinging gently against her chest. As she reached for the door, a chill ran through her, sharp and sudden. The hallway was empty, but for a moment, she could have sworn she saw a shadow move just out of sight, where the light didn't reach. That night she didn't sleep. She sat by the window, the locket in her hand, watching the desert swallow the stars. The town felt alive in a way it hadn't during the day, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for midnight. Clara didn't know why that hour felt significant, but the thought lodged in her mind like a splinter. She glanced at the locket, its surface catching the moonlight, and whispered, "What are you hiding?" The answer, when it came, was not a sound, but a feeling, a pull, like a tide dragging her toward something she couldn't see. The locket grew warm in her hand, and for the first time she noticed a faint seam along its edge, invisible in daylight. Her fingers trembled as she pressed it, but it didn't open. Not yet. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaked, though no one else was awake. Clara's breath hitched, and she knew with a certainty she couldn't explain that the locket was more than a keepsake. It was a key to what? She didn't know, but Red Hollow was about to show her. The days in Red Hollow settled into a rhythm, but Clara couldn't shake the unease that clung to her like dust. The locket hung heavier each night, its crescent moon etching itself into her dreams. By the end of her first week, the town's quiet felt less like peace and more like a held breath. The children at the schoolhouse were her only distraction, their chatter a tether to the ordinary. Yet even they seemed to sense something off about her, especially Tommy, who watched the locket with a mix of curiosity and wariness. "My ma said things like that can talk to the dead," he whispered one day, his voice low as if the walls might hear. Clara laughed it off, but her hand lingered on the locket, its metal cool despite the desert heat. The boarding house offered no comfort. Widow Hargrove's sharp eyes followed Clara's every move, her warnings about keeping to herself growing more pointed. "Folks here don't take kindly to strangers poking around," she said one evening, her broom scraping the porch like a metronome. Clara nodded, but her thoughts were on the locket. The click she'd heard that first night hadn't returned, but the memory of it lingered, sharp as a splinter. She'd taken to studying the locket in her room, tracing its edges under the lamplight, searching for the seam she'd glimpsed. It never appeared in daylight, as if the locket were playing tricks. One afternoon, after dismissing the children, Clara lingered in the schoolhouse, her fingers absently sketching the locket's crescent moon on a scrap of paper. The air was thick with heat, the kind that made thoughts sluggish. She was about to leave when she noticed a small, leather-bound book tucked behind a stack of primers on the shelf. Its cover was worn, the pages yellowed, and it smelled of old tobacco and sage. The title, handwritten in faded ink, read Tales of Red Hollow. Curiosity tugged at her, and she opened it, her eyes catching on a passage about a moon-touched charm that appeared only at midnight, binding its wearer to a promise made long ago. Her heart stuttered. The description was vague, but the mention of the moon felt too close to her locket. The book spoke of a woman named Eliza, who lived in Red Hollow decades ago, loved by two men, a rancher and a drifter. Their rivalry had ended in tragedy, though the details were smudged, as if someone had tried to erase them. The story ended abruptly, the last page torn out. Clara closed the book, her pulse quickening. Was the locket tied to Eliza? She tucked the book under her arm, telling herself she'd return it tomorrow, but she knew she wouldn't. That night, the boarding house felt different. The creaks were sharper, the shadows deeper. Clara sat by her window, the locket in her palm, its weight grounding her. The desert stretched beyond, vast and silent, but tonight it seemed to hum with something unseen. She glanced at the clock on the wall, a battered thing that ticked too loudly. It was nearing midnight. Her breath caught as she remembered the book's words, only at midnight. She held the locket up, its surface catching the faint glow of the moon. The air grew heavy, pressing against her chest. Then it came again, the click. Soft, deliberate, from the locket itself. Clara's hands shook as she turned it over, her fingers searching for the seam. There it was, faint but real, a hairline crack along the edge. She pressed it, but it wouldn't give. Her eyes darted to the clock. The hands crept closer to 12. The room felt smaller, the shadows stretching like fingers across the floor. She whispered to the locket, half expecting an answer. "What do you want?" The clock struck midnight, and the locket grew warm, almost burning. Clara gasped, nearly dropping it. The seam glowed faintly, a sliver of silver light, but still it wouldn't open. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window pane. She thought she heard a voice, a woman's, soft and pleading, carried on the breeze. "Find me," it seemed to say, though the words dissolved as quickly as they came. Clara's heart pounded, her mind racing. Was it Eliza? Or just her imagination, stirred by the book and the desert's endless whispers? She set the locket down, her hands trembling, and reached for the book. She reread the passage, hoping for clarity, but it only deepened the mystery. Eliza's story felt alive, as if it were reaching out to her. She thought of Tommy's words, of the locket talking to the dead. The idea was absurd, but Red Hollow made absurd things feel possible. She glanced at the locket again, its glow faded now, just cold metal once more. Yet the weight of it lingered, like a promise she hadn't agreed to keep. The next morning, Clara returned to the schoolhouse, the book hidden in her satchel. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her, not the children, not Widow Hargrove, but something else. During recess, Tommy lingered behind, his eyes on her locket again. "You hear anything last night?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Clara froze. "What do you mean?" she said too quickly. Tommy shrugged, but his gaze was knowing. "Just sometimes the desert talks. Ma said it's the ones who ain't left yet." Clara didn't know how to respond. She sent Tommy outside, her mind churning. The locket, the book, the voice, they were pieces of a puzzle she didn't understand. As the day wore on, she caught herself glancing at the clock, dreading midnight, but drawn to it all the same. The locket was no longer just a keepsake. It was a door, and Clara was beginning to suspect that opening it might change everything. Clara's days in Red Hollow began to blur, each one stitched together by the locket's quiet pull. She taught her lessons, smiled at the children, and nodded politely to Widow Hargrove's cryptic warnings. But her thoughts were elsewhere, on the locket, the book, and the voice that had whispered in the night. The desert seemed to watch her, its vastness both empty and alive, as if it knew something she didn't. By the end of her second week, the locket felt like an extension of her skin, its weight a constant reminder of the mystery she couldn't unravel. The schoolhouse was her refuge, though even there the air felt charged. Tommy's comments lingered in her mind, his talk of the desert and the dead, unsettling her more than she cared to admit. She'd caught him staring at the locket again, his eyes sharp with something like recognition. During a quiet moment after class, she pulled him aside. "Tommy," she said, keeping her voice soft, "what did your mother mean about things that talk to the dead?" His face tightened, and for a moment he looked older than his years. "She just said some stuff ain't meant to stay buried," he mumbled, then bolted for the door before she could press further. That evening, Clara returned to the boarding house with the leather-bound book still hidden in her satchel. She hadn't dared leave it at the schoolhouse, afraid someone might notice it missing. In her room, she pored over its pages again, searching for more about Eliza or the moon-touched charm. The book was maddeningly vague, its stories fragmented, as if written by someone afraid to tell the whole truth. One line stood out, "Asterisk, the locket chooses its keeper, and the keeper must choose to listen." Clara's fingers brushed the locket, her pulse quickening. Was she its keeper? And if so, what was she supposed to hear? As midnight approached, she sat by the window, the locket cradled in her hands. The desert was still, the stars sharp against the black sky. The clock's ticking filled the room, each second pulling her closer to the hour that seemed to matter. She didn't know why she was waiting, only that she had to. The locket had glowed once before, and the voice, whether real or imagined, had called to her. She needed to know more, even if it scared her. At the stroke of midnight, the locket hummed. Not a sound, but a vibration, faint and warm like a heartbeat. Clara's breath caught as she held it up, the crescent moon etching glinting in the moonlight. The seam appeared again, a delicate line of silver, but it still wouldn't open. She pressed harder, her fingers trembling, and whispered, "Eliza, are you there?" The room grew colder, the air thick with something she couldn't name. Then a shadow moved not outside, but in the reflection of the window. A woman's silhouette, faint and fleeting, stood behind her. Clara spun around, her heart in her throat, but the room was empty. The lamp flickered, casting jagged shadows on the walls. She clutched the locket, her voice barely a whisper. "Who's there?" No answer came, but the air felt alive, pressing against her like a held breath. She turned back to the window, half expecting to see the silhouette again, but there was only the desert, endless and silent. The locket cooled in her hand, the moment passing as quickly as it had come. Sleep was impossible after that. Clara lay awake, the book open beside her, its words swimming in her mind. She thought of Eliza, the rancher, the drifter. Their story felt like a wound that hadn't healed. The next morning she moved through her lessons in a daze, her thoughts tangled. The children noticed, their whispers louder than usual. Tommy lingered again, his eyes flicking to the locket. "You look like you've seen something," he said, his voice low. Clara forced a smile. "Just tired," she lied, but his gaze held hers, as if he knew better. Desperate for answers, Clara decided to ask Widow Hargrove about the town's history. After dinner, she found the older woman in the parlor, knitting by the fire. The air smelled of cedar and ash, and the silence was heavy. "Mrs. Hargrove," Clara began, choosing her words carefully, "do you know anything about a woman named Eliza who lived here years ago?" The widow's needles paused, her eyes narrowing. "Folks tell all sorts of tales," she said, her voice clipped. "Best not to dig up what's been laid to rest." She resumed knitting, the conversation clearly over. Clara retreated to her room, frustrated but undeterred. The widow's reaction only confirmed that Eliza was more than a story. She opened the book again, rereading the passage about the locket. Asterisk, the keeper must choose to listen. The words felt like a challenge. She didn't know what she was supposed to hear, but the locket was pulling her deeper into Red Hollow's secrets, and she couldn't turn back now. As the day faded, Clara stood at her window, watching the desert swallow the light. The locket rested against her chest, its weight both a comfort and a warning. She thought of the silhouette, the voice, the hum of the locket at midnight. Something was waking in Red Hollow, and she was caught in its tide. Tomorrow, she decided she'd search the town for answers, maybe the church, or the old saloon, or the graveyard tucked behind the hill. The locket was leading her somewhere, and she was beginning to understand that it wouldn't let her go until she followed. The sun hung low over Red Hollow, painting the desert in shades of gold and shadow. Clara moved through her days with a quiet resolve, her thoughts tethered to the locket and the fleeting glimpses of something beyond her understanding. The silhouette in the window, the hum at midnight, the cryptic words in the book, they wove a thread she couldn't ignore. By her third week in town, the locket felt less like a keepsake and more like a compass, pointing her toward a truth buried in Red Hollow's dust. The schoolhouse remained her anchor, though the children's whispers grew bolder. Tommy, especially, seemed to sense her unease. During a break, he lingered by her desk, kicking at the floorboards. "You been to the graveyard yet, Miss Everett?" he asked, his voice low. Clara's heart skipped. "Why would I go there?" she said, keeping her tone light. Tommy shrugged, his eyes on the locket. "Ma said that's where the stories sleep. Maybe your locket's got one." He darted off before she could respond, leaving her with a chill that lingered long after the bell rang. That afternoon, Clara made up her mind. The graveyard, tucked behind a low hill at the edge of town, seemed as good a place as any to start looking for answers. She waited until the children had gone, then slipped the leather-bound book into her satchel and headed out. The desert air was sharp, carrying the scent of sage and something faintly metallic. The graveyard was small, its wooden markers weathered by time, some so faded they were nearly blank. Clara wandered among them, her fingers brushing the locket, searching for a name that might belong to Eliza. Most of the graves were unremarkable ranchers, miners, wives lost to childbirth. But one caught her eye, half hidden under a gnarled mesquite tree. The marker was simple, the name carved deep. Eliza Mayhew, 1859 to 1882. Clara's breath caught. The dates matched the timeline in the book, and the locket seemed to pulse against her chest, though she told herself it was her imagination. She knelt by the grave, tracing the letters with her finger. There was no epitaph, no hint of who Eliza had been, but the air felt heavier here, as if the ground itself remembered. She opened the book, hoping for a clue, but the pages offered nothing new. The story of Eliza and her two suitors, the rancher and the drifter, ended in tragedy, but the details were maddeningly vague. Clara glanced at the locket, its crescent moon catching the fading light. "Are you hers?" she whispered, half expecting an answer. The wind stirred, carrying a faint hum, like the locket's vibration from the night before. She stood, her heart pounding, and scanned the graveyard. It was empty, but she felt watched, the same prickling sensation she'd had in her room. As she turned to leave, a shadow flickered at the corner of her eye there, then gone, near a cluster of graves. She froze, her pulse racing. "Hello?" she called, her voice swallowed by the desert. Nothing answered, but the locket grew warm, a subtle heat that spread through her fingers. She clutched it tightly, torn between fear and curiosity. The shadow didn't reappear, but the feeling of being seen lingered, sharp and undeniable. Back at the boarding house, Clara avoided Widow Hargrove's probing gaze and hurried to her room. She sat by the window, the locket in her hand, replaying the day. Eliza's grave, Tommy's words, the shadow, they were pieces of a puzzle, but the picture was still unclear. She opened the book again, her eyes lingering on the line about the locket choosing its keeper. What did it want from her? And why now, after years of lying dormant around her neck? Midnight came as it always did, with the clock's relentless ticking. Clara held the locket, her breath shallow, waiting for the hum, the click, anything. The room was still, the desert beyond her window, silent under a blanket of stars. At the stroke of 12, the locket stirred, not a sound, but a warmth stronger than before. The seam glowed faintly, and for a moment she thought it might finally open. She pressed it, her fingers trembling, but it held fast. Then the voice came again, soft, distant, a woman's plea. "Find me," it whispered, clearer this time, carried on a breeze that shouldn't exist in a closed room. Clara's heart thudded. She set the locket down, her hands shaking, and reached for the book. The pages felt heavier, as if they carried more than words. She reread the passage about Eliza, her mind racing. The locket was tied to her, to this town, to a promise broken long ago. But what promise? And why was Clara the one to hear it? She thought of the graveyard, the shadow, the hum. Red Hollow was waking something, and she was caught in its pull. The next morning she returned to the schoolhouse, her thoughts scattered. Tommy was there, as always, watching her with those two old eyes. "You went to the graveyard, didn't you?" he said, not a question. Clara nodded, too tired to lie. "Did you find her?" he asked. She hesitated, then said, "I found a name. Eliza Mayhew." Tommy's face paled, and for the first time, he looked afraid. "Don't tell nobody you found that," he whispered, then ran to join the other children, leaving Clara with more questions than answers. The locket rested against her chest, its weight a quiet demand. She knew she couldn't stop now, not with Eliza's voice in her ears, not with the shadow lingering at the edge of her vision. Red Hollow was telling her a story, and the locket was her guide. She just had to find the courage to follow it. The desert wind carried a restless edge as Clara walked to the schoolhouse, the locket swaying gently against her chest. Red Hollow felt smaller now, its streets closing in like the walls of a dream. Eliza Mayhew's grave had stirred something in her, a certainty that the locket's secrets were tied to this town, to a story that refused to stay buried. The hum at midnight, the shadow in the graveyard, the voice whispering, "Find me," they were threads in a tapestry she was only beginning to see. Yet each step forward felt like stepping into deeper water, the current pulling her towards something she wasn't sure she was ready to face. The children were rowdier that morning, their laughter sharp against the quiet. Tommy avoided her gaze, his usual curiosity replaced by a guarded silence. Clara wondered what he knew, what his mother had told him about Eliza or the locket. She didn't press him, not yet. The weight of his warning, "Don't tell nobody," hung heavy, and she couldn't shake the feeling that Red Hollow's secrets were guarded by more than just time. She taught her lessons mechanically, her mind elsewhere, tracing the crescent moon in her thoughts. After class, Clara lingered in the schoolhouse, the leather-bound book open on her desk. She'd read the passage about Eliza so many times the words felt warm, but they offered no new clues. The locket, the rancher, the drifter, a love triangle that ended in sorrow, but the how and why remained out of reach. She closed the book, frustrated, and glanced out the window. The desert stretched beyond, its vastness both beautiful and unnerving. She decided to try another path. The old saloon, a weathered relic at the edge of town, might hold whispers of the past. People talked in saloons, and stories lingered in their walls. The saloon was quiet in the late afternoon, its swinging doors creaking as Clara stepped inside. The air smelled of stale whiskey and dust, the bar lined with bottles that glinted in the dim light. A few locals glanced her way, their eyes narrowing before returning to their drinks. The barkeep, a wiry man named Amos, with a scar across his cheek, nodded as she approached. "Ain't seen you here before, schoolteacher," he said, his voice rough but not unkind. Clara offered a small smile. "Just curious about the town's history," she said, choosing her words carefully. "Heard anything about a woman named Eliza Mayhew?" Amos's hands paused on the glass he was polishing, his expression unreadable. "Old stories ain't worth digging up," he said, echoing Widow Hargrove's warning. "Folks like to let the past sleep." Clara pressed gently, mentioning the locket without showing it. Amos's eyes flicked to her neck, where the chain peeked from her collar, and for a moment she thought he might say more. Instead he shrugged. Heard she loved the wrong man, or maybe two. Didn't end well. He turned away, signaling the conversation's end. Disappointed but not surprised, Clara left the saloon, the locket warm against her skin. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the street. She felt the now familiar prickle of being watched, though the street was empty. Her steps quickened, the locket's weight urging her back to the boarding house. In her room, she sat by the window, the book open in her lap. The desert was a sea of silver under the rising moon, and the clock ticked toward midnight. She held the locket, its crescent moon glinting, and waited. At midnight the hum came again, stronger now, a vibration that seemed to echo in her bones. The locket grew warm, the seam glowing with that faint silver light. Clara's fingers trembled as she pressed it, willing it to open, but it held fast. The air thickened, the room shrinking around her. Then the voice clearer, closer, a woman's soft plea. "Find me before it's too late." Clara's heart raced. She whispered back, "Where are you?" The words felt foolish, but the locket pulsed, as if answering. In the window's reflection, the silhouette appeared, again fainter this time, but unmistakable. A woman in white, her face blurred. Clara turned, her breath shallow, but the room was empty. The lamp flickered, casting shadows that seemed to sway like dancers. She clutched the locket, her mind spinning. Eliza was reaching out, but why? And what did too late mean? She thought of the graveyard, the saloon, the book, each a piece of the puzzle, but none fitting together. The locket was the key, she was sure, but it was keeping its secrets locked tight. The next morning, Clara woke with a heaviness she couldn't shake. She went through her lessons, her eyes drifting to Tommy, who still avoided her. During recess, she caught him alone by the schoolhouse steps. "Tommy," she said softly, "what do you know about Eliza?" His face paled, and he glanced at the locket. "Ma said she's still here," he whispered. "Said the locket keeps her close? You gotta be careful, Miss Everett." Before she could ask more, he ran off, leaving her with a knot of dread. Clara knew she couldn't stop now. The locket was pulling her deeper, and Eliza's voice was growing louder. She decided to return to the graveyard that evening, to see if the answers lay with Eliza's grave. The locket hummed faintly as she made her choice, as if agreeing. Red Hollow was no longer just a town, it was a story, and Clara was part of it, whether she wanted to be or not. The desert night pressed against Clara's window, its silence heavy with secrets. The locket had become her shadow, its hum at midnight a ritual she both dreaded and craved. Eliza's voice asterisk, "Find me before it's too late," asterisk echoed in her mind, a plea that grew sharper with each passing day. Red Hollow was no longer just a place to start over. It was a stage where a story older than Clara was playing out, and she was its reluctant lead. The graveyard, the saloon, the book, they were breadcrumbs, but the path they led to remained shrouded. At the schoolhouse, Clara's lessons felt like a performance, her smile a mask for the questions churning inside her. Tommy's wariness had spread to the other children, their whispers now tinged with unease. She caught fragments of their talk, the locket lady, ghosts in the desert, and wondered how much was childish fancy and how much was truth. During a quiet moment, she tried to ask Tommy more, but he shook his head, his eyes flicking to the locket. "You keep a skin, Miss Everett. You'll find something you don't want," he said, then slipped away, leaving her with a knot in her chest. Clara knew she needed more than graves and rumors. The church, a small adobe building with a crooked steeple, seemed the next place to look. Its doors were always open, though few seemed to go inside. That afternoon, after dismissing the children, she walked there, the locket warm against her skin. The air inside was cool, smelling of wax and old wood. A single candle burned on the altar, its flame steady despite the draft. The pastor, a gaunt man named Reverend Calloway, was sweeping the aisle, his movements slow and deliberate. "Miss Everett," he said, his voice soft but carrying weight. "What brings you here?" Clara hesitated, then asked about Eliza Mayhew, keeping her tone casual. The Reverend's broom paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. Old wounds, that name, he said. She was a kind soul, caught between two hearts. The rancher, Caleb, loved her fiercely. The drifter, Jonah, loved her quietly. Neither could let her go. Clara's pulse quickened. What happened to them? She asked. Calloway sighed, his gaze distant. Some say betrayal, some say fate. All I know is Eliza's gone, and the desert keeps the rest. He offered no more, but his words gave shape to the story in the book. Caleb and Jonah names to pin to the faceless suitors. Clara thanked him and left, the locket humming faintly as she stepped into the fading light. The Reverend's voice lingered, his talk of betrayal stirring unease. Was Eliza's death an accident or something darker? And why was the locket pulling Clara into it now? Back at the boarding house, Widow Hargrove was in the kitchen, her hands dusted with flour. Clara avoided her usual questions, but the widow's eyes lingered on her neck, where the locket's chain glinted. "You're looking restless, girl," she said, her tone sharp. "Some things are better left alone." Clara murmured agreement, but her mind was on the church, the names, the locket. In her room, she opened the book, hoping for more, but the pages were as cryptic as ever. Asterisk, the locket chooses its keeper. She traced the words, her fingers trembling. Midnight came, the clock's ticks a countdown. Clara sat by the window, the locket in her palm, its crescent moon catching the starlight. The desert was still, but the air felt alive, humming with anticipation. At the stroke of 12, the locket warmed, its seam glowing silver. She pressed it, her breath shallow, but it wouldn't open. The voice came, clearer now, laced with urgency. "Find me in the hollow." Clara's heart raced. The hollow? Red Hollow itself or something else? She whispered back, "Where?" But the voice faded, leaving only the wind's soft moan. In the window's reflection, the silhouette appeared closer this time, the woman in white, her face still blurred. Clara turned, her pulse pounding, but the room was empty. The lamp flickered, shadows dancing like memories. She clutched the locket, its warmth fading, and felt a pull, not just from the locket, but from the desert beyond. The hollow. She thought of the town's name, the dip in the land where Red Hollow sat, surrounded by hills. Was that where Eliza meant? Sleep was a lost cause. Clara lay awake, the book beside her, its words swimming in her mind. Caleb, Jonah, Eliza, a triangle that broke, leaving echoes in the locket. She thought of Tommy's warnings, the Reverend's sighs, the widow's sharp looks. Red Hollow was guarding its past, but the locket was prying it open, and Clara was its tool. By morning, she decided to search the town's edges, where the hills cradled the hollow. Maybe there she'd find what Eliza wanted. At the schoolhouse, Tommy was quieter than ever, his eyes avoiding hers. Clara didn't push, but his silence felt like a warning. She taught her lessons, her mind on the hollow, the locket a steady weight. As the children left, she caught Tommy lingering by the door. "Be careful, Miss Everett," he whispered, then ran off, his words heavy with fear. Clara stood alone, the locket warm against her chest, and knew the next step would take her closer to Eliza and whatever truth the desert held. The desert seemed to hold its breath as Clara stepped into the fading light, her boots crunching against the dry earth. Red Hollow's hills loomed around the town, their shadows stretching like fingers across the hollow. The locket's latest whisper asterisk, "Find me." In the hollow asterisk, had lodged in her mind, a puzzle piece that demanded action. She decided to search the town's edges where the land dipped and the hills cradled secrets. The locket was warm against her chest, its crescent moon a silent guide, urging her towards something she couldn't yet name. The schoolhouse day had been a blur, her lessons delivered through a fog of anticipation. Tommy's whispered warning, "Be careful," Miss Everett echoed in her thoughts, his fear a mirror to her own. She hadn't pressed him, sensing he'd said all he was willing to. The children's chatter about ghosts and lockets had quieted, replaced by uneasy glances, as if they sensed the shift in her. Clara felt it too, a pull, like the tide of a river she couldn't see, drawing her deeper into Red Hollow's past. She waited until dusk, when the town grew still, before slipping out of the boarding house. Widow Hargrove was in the parlor, her knitting needles clicking like a warning, but Clara avoided her gaze and stepped into the evening air. The hollow was a natural basin, ringed by low hills dotted with sagebrush and mesquite. She headed toward the northern edge, where the land dipped sharply, guided by instinct and the locket's faint hum. The air was cool, carrying the scent of dust and something sweeter, like wildflowers long gone. As she walked, the locket grew warmer, its weight almost alive. She paused at the base of a hill, where a cluster of rocks formed a natural alcove. The spot felt significant, though she couldn't say why. Kneeling, she brushed away dirt, half expecting to find something buried, a letter, a trinket, a clue. Nothing but pebbles and roots met her fingers. She stood frustrated and scanned the hollow. The hills seemed to watch her, their silence heavy with expectation. The locket pulsed, a soft rhythm, and she whispered, "Eliza, what am I looking for?" The wind answered, carrying a faint hum, like the locket's vibration, but larger, as if the hollow itself were singing. Clara's heart quickened. She followed the sound, her steps careful, until she reached a gnarled cottonwood tree, its branches twisted like arms reaching for the sky. Beneath it, the ground was uneven, a patch of earth slightly raised, as if disturbed long ago. She knelt again, her fingers tracing the soil. The locket burned against her chest, and for a moment she thought she saw a flicker, a woman's silhouette, white dress catching the moonlight, standing just beyond the tree. Clara froze, her breath shallow. "Eliza?" she called, her voice barely a whisper. The silhouette vanished, but the air grew heavy, pressing against her. She dug gently at the raised earth, her hands trembling, but found only dirt and stones. The locket's hum faded, leaving her with a hollow ache. Whatever was here, it wasn't ready to be found. She stood, brushing dirt from her hands, and felt the weight of being watched, not hostile, but urgent, as if time were slipping away. Back at the boarding house, Clara slipped past Widow Hargrove, who was still knitting, her eyes sharp in the firelight. In her room, she sat by the window, the locket in her palm. The book lay open beside her, its pages offering no new answers. Caleb, Jonah, Eliza, their story was a knot she couldn't untangle. She thought of the cottonwood tree, the raised earth, the silhouette. The hollow was important, she was sure, but its secrets were guarded, revealed only in fragments. Midnight came, the clock's ticks a familiar summons. Clara held the locket, its crescent moon glinting in the lamplight. The room was still, the desert beyond a sea of shadows. At the stroke of 12, the locket warmed, its seam glowing faintly. She pressed it, her fingers steady now, but it wouldn't open. The voice came, soft but insistent, in the hollow. "Before it's too late." Clara's pulse raced. The words were the same, but the urgency was new, a plea that felt like a warning. She whispered back, "What's too late?" But the voice faded, leaving only the wind's low moan. In the window's reflection, the silhouette appeared again closer, the woman in white. Her face still blurred, but her presence stronger. Clara turned, her heart pounding, but the room was empty. The lamp flickered, shadows curling like smoke. She clutched the locket, its warmth fading, and felt a pull toward the hollow, stronger now. Whatever Eliza needed, it was there, buried in the earth or the town's memory. The next morning, Clara moved through her lessons with a quiet determination. Tommy watched her, his eyes wary but curious. During recess, she caught him by the schoolhouse steps. "Tommy," she said softly, "what do you know about the hollow?" His face tightened and he glanced at the locket. "Ma said it's where things get lost," he whispered, "and sometimes found. But you gotta be sure you want it." He ran off, leaving Clara with a chill that settled deep. She knew she'd return to the hollow, to the cottonwood tree, to the raised earth. The locket was leading her, and Eliza's voice was growing louder. Red Hollow was no longer just a town, it was a story, and Clara was its keeper, whether she chose to be or not. The desert night wrapped Red Hollow in a quiet so deep it felt like a held breath. Clara's resolve had hardened, the locket's pull now a steady current guiding her steps. The hollow, with its cottonwood tree and raised earth, had become a beacon in her mind, its significance undeniable after Eliza's whispered plea in the hollow. "Before it's too late." The silhouette in the window, the locket's hum, the fragments of a story older than the town itself. They were pieces of a truth Clara was determined to uncover, even if it scared her. Her days at the schoolhouse passed in a haze, her lessons a backdrop to her thoughts. The children sensed her distraction, their whispers softer now, as if they feared stirring something. Tommy's words about the hollow asterisk, where things get lost, and sometimes found asterisk echoed in her mind, his warning laced with a knowledge she couldn't dismiss. She didn't ask him more, sensing his fear, but his words drove her to return to the hollow, to seek what the locket wanted her to find. Clara waited until dusk, when the town settled into silence, before slipping out of the boarding house. Widow Hargrove was in the kitchen, her sharp eyes missing nothing, but Clara murmured an excuse about needing air and stepped into the evening. The desert was cool, the hills casting long shadows across the hollow. The locket was warm against her chest, its crescent moon glinting faintly as she walked toward the cottonwood tree. The air carried a faint sweetness, like the ghost of wildflowers, and the hum she'd felt before seemed to rise from the earth itself. At the tree, Clara knelt by the raised patch of earth, her fingers brushing the dry soil. The locket pulsed, a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. She dug gently, her hands guided by instinct, expecting nothing but hoping for something, a letter, a trinket, anything to tie Eliza to this place. The earth gave way easily, as if it had been waiting. A few inches down, her fingers brushed something hard, smooth, cold. She pulled it free, a small, tarnished silver ring, its band etched with a tiny star. Her breath caught. Was this Eliza's? The locket burned against her skin, its hum louder now, almost a song. Clara held the ring up, its star catching the moonlight. For a moment, she thought she saw the silhouette again near the tree. The woman in white, her form clearer, but her face still blurred. "Is this yours?" Clara whispered, her voice trembling. The silhouette flickered, then vanished, but the air grew heavy, pressing against her like a sigh. The locket cooled, its hum fading, as if satisfied. Clara slipped the ring into her pocket, her mind racing. The hollow had given her something, but it wasn't enough, not yet. Back at the boarding house, Clara avoided Widow Hargrove's gaze and hurried to her room. She set the ring on her bedside table, next to the locket, and opened the leather-bound book. Its pages offered no mention of a ring, but the story of Eliza, Caleb, and Jonah felt closer now, more real. A ring meant a promised love or something broken. She thought of the Reverend's words, asterisk caught between two hearts. Had the ring belonged to Eliza? Given by Caleb, the rancher, or Jonah, the drifter? And why was it buried in the hollow? Midnight came. The clock's ticks a summons she couldn't ignore. Clara sat by the window, the locket in one hand, the ring in the other. The desert stretched beyond, a sea of shadows under a star-strewn sky. At the stroke of 12, the locket warmed, its seam glowing silver. She pressed it, her fingers steady, but it wouldn't open. The voice came, softer now, tinged with sorrow. "In the hollow, my heart." Clara's pulse quickened. The ring was at Eliza's heart. A token of love or betrayal? She whispered, "What happened to you?" But the voice faded, leaving only the wind's soft moan. In the window's reflection, the silhouette appeared closer, the woman in white, her dress catching the moonlight. Clara turned, her heart pounding, but the room was empty. The lamp flickered, shadows curling like memories. She set the locket and ring down, their weight anchoring her. The hollow had given her a piece of the puzzle, but the picture was still incomplete. She needed more about Caleb, Jonah, the tragedy that bound them. The next morning, Clara taught her lessons with a quiet intensity, her thoughts on the ring and the hollow. Tommy watched her, his eyes wary but curious. During recess, she caught him by the schoolhouse steps. "Tommy," she said softly, "have you heard of a ring with a star buried in the hollow?" His face paled, and he shook his head, but his eyes betrayed him. "Ma said the hollow keeps things," he whispered. "Things folks loved or lost." He ran off, leaving Clara with a chill that settled deep. She knew she'd return to the hollow, to the tree, to the earth that had given up the ring. The locket was leading her, and Eliza's voice was a call she couldn't ignore. Red Hollow was telling her a story, and Clara was its keeper, bound by a promise she hadn't made but couldn't break. The desert air clung to Clara, heavy with the scent of sage and secrets, as she moved through another day in Red Hollow. The locket and the ring, its tiny star glinting like a captured piece of the night, were now twin anchors, pulling her deeper into a story she couldn't escape. Eliza's voice, the silhouette, the hum of the locket at midnight. They were no longer just mysteries, but threads in a tapestry woven through the hollow. The ring buried under the cottonwood tree felt like a piece of Eliza's heart, but its meaning remained elusive, a whisper of love or loss that Clara couldn't yet decipher. At the schoolhouse, the children's eyes followed her, their whispers quieter now, as if they sensed the weight she carried. Tommy's cryptic words about the hollow asterisk things folks loved, or lost asterisk, had stirred a new urgency in her. She taught her lessons with a forced calm, her mind on the ring and the names from the book: Eliza, Caleb, Jonah. The triangle that had ended in tragedy was coming into focus, but the details stayed just out of reach, like a dream fading at dawn. She needed more, and Red Hollow's reluctance to share its past only made her more determined. After dismissing the children, Clara lingered in the schoolhouse, the leather-bound book open on her desk. She reread the passage about Eliza, searching for any hint of a ring. The story mentioned a promise, a choice, a betrayal, but no star, no silver band. Frustrated, she tucked the book into her satchel and decided to try the town's general store. If the saloon and church held whispers of the past, the store, where locals traded goods and gossip, might hold more. The Locket hummed faintly as she left, as if approving her choice. The general store was a cluttered space, its shelves lined with jars of preserves, bolts of cloth, and tools worn by use. The owner, a stout woman named Mrs. Lottie, greeted Clara with a nod, her eyes lingering on the Locket's chain. "Looking for something special, school teacher?" she asked, her tone warm but cautious. Clara smiled, keeping her voice light. "Just curious about the town's history. Ever hear of a woman named Eliza Mayhew, or a ring with a star?" Lottie's hands paused on a ledger, her expression tightening. "Old tailies," she said, her voice low. "Eliza was loved, that's sure. A ring? Might have been a gift or a curse. Best not to ask too many questions." Lottie's words were vague, but her unease was clear. Clara thanked her and left, the ring heavy in her pocket, the locket warm against her chest. The town was guarding its secrets, but each conversation added a piece to the puzzle. Eliza had been loved by Caleb, by Jonah, but something had gone wrong, and the ring was part of it. As she walked back to the boarding house, the desert seemed to hum, the hills watching her like silent sentinels. The locket pulsed, a quiet reminder that she was on the right path. In her room, Clara set the ring and locket side by side, their metal glinting in the lamplight. She opened the book, her eyes tracing the familiar words. "The locket chooses its keeper." The ring, she thought, might be another kind of keeper, a promise made or broken. She thought of Eliza's voice, "my heart," and wondered if the ring had been a vow, a token of love that led to her downfall. The thought sent a chill through her, but she couldn't stop now. The hollow was calling, and she had to answer. Midnight came, the clock's ticks a steady drumbeat. Clara sat by the window, the locket in one hand, the ring in the other. The desert was a sea of shadows, the stars sharp against the sky. At the stroke of 12, the locket warmed, its seam glowing silver. She pressed it, her fingers steady, but it wouldn't open. The voice came, softer now, laced with longing. In the hollow, "My heart, set it free." Clara's breath caught. Set it free? The ring or something else? She whispered, "How?" But the voice faded, leaving only the wind's soft sigh. In the window's reflection, the silhouette appeared closer, the woman in white, her dress flowing like moonlight. For a moment, Clara thought she saw her eyes, sad and searching, but they blurred before she could be sure. She turned, her heart pounding, but the room was empty. The lamp flickered, shadows curling like memories. She set the locket and ring down, their weight grounding her. The hollow held the answers. She was sure of it, but she needed to know what to do with the ring. how to free whatever Eliza meant. The next morning, Clara taught her lessons with a quiet resolve, her thoughts on the hollow and the cottonwood tree. Tommy watched her, his eyes wary but curious. During recess, she caught him by the schoolhouse steps. "Tommy," she said softly, "what does it mean to set something free in the hollow?" His face paled, and he glanced at the locket. "Ma said some things are tied to the earth," he whispered. "You gotta give 'em back or they never rest." He ran off, leaving Clara with a chill that settled deep. She knew she'd return to the hollow, to the tree, to the earth that had given up the ring. The locket and ring were leading her, and Eliza's voice was a call she couldn't ignore. Red Hollow was a story, and Clara was its keeper, bound to set something free, whether it was Eliza's heart or her own. The desert stretched beyond Red Hollow, its vastness a mirror to the questions swirling in Clara's mind. The locket and the ring were twin weights, their secrets humming beneath the surface like a song she couldn't quite hear. Eliza's voice asterisk in the hollow, "My heart? Set it free," asterisk had become a refrain, urging her back to the cottonwood tree, to the raised earth where she'd found the ring. The town felt smaller each day, its streets and shadows closing in, as if Red Hollow itself were pushing her toward the truth. Clara was no longer just a school teacher. She was a keeper of something older, something restless. At the schoolhouse, the children's eyes followed her, their whispers now a quiet hum. Tommy's warning about giving things back to the earth lingered, his fear a shadow over her thoughts. She taught her lessons with a calm she didn't feel, her mind on the hollow, the ring, and the names Eliza, Caleb, Jonah that wove through the leather-bound book. The story was clearer now. A love torn apart, a promise broken, a tragedy buried. But how the ring and locket fit and what set it free meant remained just out of reach. After dismissing the children, Clara decided to seek out someone new, old Mr. Tanner, the town's blacksmith who'd lived in Red Hollow longer than most. His shop was at the town's edge, its forge glowing like a heartbeat. The air smelled of iron and ash as she approached, the locket warm against her chest. Tanner was a stooped man with hands like leather, his eyes sharp despite his years. "Schoolteacher," he said, wiping soot from his brow. "What brings you to my fire?" Clara hesitated, then asked about Eliza Mayhew and a ring with a star. Tanner's hands stilled, his gaze flicking to the locket's chain peeking from her collar. "Eliza," he said, his voice low. She was a light in this town till love tore it out of her. Caleb gave her a ring, they say, to bind her to him. But Jonah, he had her heart, not her hand. That ring caused more pain than it promised. He shook his head, returning to his work. Some things are best left in the ground. Clara's pulse quickened. Caleb's ring, Jonah's love, pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. She thanked Tanner and left, the ring heavy in her pocket, the locket humming faintly. The hollow was calling, and she knew she couldn't delay. That evening she slipped out of the boarding house, avoiding Widow Hargrove's watchful eyes, and headed to the cottonwood tree. The desert was cool, the hills dark against a sky scattered with stars. The locket pulsed, its rhythm stronger now, as if urging her forward. At the tree, Clara knelt by the raised earth, the ring in one hand, the locket in the other. The air was heavy, the hum from the hollow rising like a chorus. She placed the ring on the ground, her fingers trembling. "Eliza," she whispered, Is this what you want? To give it back? The locket burned, its seam glowing silver, and for a moment she thought it might open. But it held fast, and the hum faded, leaving only silence. The silhouette appeared near the tree, the woman in white, her form clearer, her eyes sad but sharp. Clara's breath caught, but before she could speak, the figure vanished, the air lightening as if a weight had lifted. Clara stood, the ring still in her hand, unsure if she'd done what was needed. The locket cooled, its silence a question. She returned to the boarding house, her mind racing. In her room, she opened the book, rereading the passage about the locket's keeper and the promise. Tanner's words echoed Caleb's ring, Jonah's love. The ring was Caleb's, a promise Eliza hadn't kept. Was that the heart she needed to set free? Or was it Jonah's buried with her in the hollow? Midnight came, the clock's ticks a steady pulse. Clara sat by the window, the locket and ring before her, the desert a sea of shadows. At the stroke of 12, the locket warmed, its seam glowing faintly. She pressed it, her heart pounding, but it wouldn't open. The voice came, soft and sorrowful. In the hollow, my heart, return it. Clara's fingers tightened around the ring. Return it to the earth, to Eliza's grave, to someone else? She whispered, who? But the voice faded, leaving only the wind's soft sigh. In the window's reflection, the silhouette appeared closer, the woman in white, her eyes clearer now, filled with a longing that pierced Clara's heart. She turned, but the room was empty. The lamp flickered, shadows curling like memories. Clara set the locket and ring down, their weight grounding her. The hollow was the key, but she needed to understand what to return and to whom. The next morning, Clara taught her lessons with a quiet intensity, her thoughts on the hollow and the ring. Tommy watched her, his eyes wary but curious. During recess, she caught him by the schoolhouse steps. Tommy, she said softly, what happens when you return something to the hollow? His face paled, and he glanced at the locket. Ma said it lets M rest, he whispered. But only if it's the right thing. He ran off, leaving Clara with a chill that settled deep. She knew she'd return to the hollow, to the tree, to Eliza. The locket and ring were her guides, and Eliza's voice was a call she couldn't ignore. Red Hollow was a story, and Clara was its keeper, bound to set a heart free, whether it was Eliza's or her own. The desert night was a blanket of stars over Red Hollow, its silence a canvas for Clara's racing thoughts. The locket and the ring were no longer just objects. They were keys to a story that pulsed through the hollow, binding her to Eliza Mayhew's unfinished tale. The blacksmith's words, Caleb's ring, Jonah's love, had given shape to the tragedy, but the locket's plea to return it left Clara grasping for clarity. Return what? The ring to the earth? Or something deeper, tied to Eliza's heart? The hollow held the answer, and Clara felt its call like a tide pulling her under. At the schoolhouse, the children's whispers had faded to a hush, their eyes tracking her with a mix of curiosity and fear. Tommy's latest warning, only if it's the right thing, weighed heavy, his young voice carrying the town's guarded secrets. Clara taught her lessons with a calm she didn't feel, her mind on the cottonwood tree, the raised earth, and the silhouette that haunted her reflections. The locket was warm against her chest, its hum a quiet insistence that time was running out. After dismissing the children, Clara decided to revisit the church. Reverend Calloway had known Eliza's name, her story. Maybe he held more pieces of the puzzle. The adobe church was quiet, its single candle burning steady on the altar. Calloway was there, arranging hymnals, his gaunt frame moving with deliberate care. "Miss Everett," he said, his eyes flicking to the Locket's chain. "You're chasing shadows, aren't you?" Clara nodded, her voice steady. "I found a ring in the hollow with a star. Was it Caleb's? Or Jonah's?" Calloway's hands stilled, his gaze distant. "Caleb gave her a ring to claim her," he said softly. "Jonah gave her his heart, but no trinket could hold it. Eliza wore that ring, but it wasn't her choice. When she died, folks said the ring was lost or hidden." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "If you found it, be careful. Some promises don't rest easy." Clara's pulse quickened. The ring was Caleb's, a claim Eliza hadn't wanted. But what of Jonah? She thanked Calloway and left, the locket humming faintly, as if urging her back to the hollow. The evening air was cool as Clara slipped out of the boarding house, avoiding Widow Hargrove's sharp gaze. The desert stretched before her, the hills dark sentinels around the hollow. She reached a cottonwood tree, its twisted branches stark against the sky. Kneeling by the raised earth, she held the ring, its star glinting in the moonlight. The locket pulsed, its warmth spreading through her fingers. "Eliza," she whispered, "is this what you need returned?" The air grew heavy, the hum rising from the ground like a heartbeat. Clara placed the ring on the earth, her hands trembling. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the locket burned, its seam glowing silver, brighter than before. She pressed it, her breath shallow, but it wouldn't open. The silhouette appeared near the tree, the woman in white, her form sharper, her eyes clear with a sorrow that pierced Clara's heart. "Not enough," the voice whispered, faint but clear. "My heart?" In the hollow, Clara's chest tightened. The ring wasn't enough. What was Eliza's heart? She stood, the ring back in her pocket, the locket cooling but still alive with purpose. The silhouette vanished, the air lightening, but the hum lingered, urging her to keep searching. Clara returned to the boarding house, her mind spinning. In her room, she opened the leather-bound book, its pages worn from her touch. The story of Eliza, Caleb, and Jonah offered no new clues, but Calloway's words echoed asterisk. Jonah gave her his heart. Was Jonah's love the key? And where was it, if not the ring? Midnight came, the clock's ticks a steady summons. Clara sat by the window, the locket and ring before her, the desert a sea of shadows. At the stroke of 12, the locket warmed, its seam glowing faintly. She pressed it, her heart pounding, but it held fast. The voice came, soft and urgent. In the hollow, "My heart, Jonah." Clara's breath caught. Jonah, the drifter, the one who loved her quietly. Was his heart buried in the hollow, tied to Eliza's plea? She whispered, "Where is it?" But the voice faded, leaving only the wind's soft moan. In the window's reflection, the silhouette appeared closer, the woman in white, her eyes pleading. Clara turned, but the room was empty. The lamp flickered, shadows curling like memories. She set the locket and ring down, their weight grounding her. The hollow was the key, but Jonah's heart, whatever it was, remained hidden. She needed to find it to set Eliza free. The next morning, Clara taught her lessons with a quiet resolve, her thoughts on Jonah and the hollow. Tommy watched her, his eyes wary but curious. During recess, she caught him by the schoolhouse steps. "Tommy," she said softly, "what do you know about Jonah, the drifter?" His face paled, and he glanced at the locket. "Ma said he left after Eliza died," he whispered. "But some say he never left the hollow." He ran off, leaving Clara with a chill that settled deep. She knew she'd return to the hollow, to the tree, to the earth that held Eliza's secrets. The locket and ring were her guides, and Eliza's voice was a call she couldn't ignore. Red Hollow was a story, and Clara was its keeper, bound to find Jonah's heart, whatever it might be. The desert night draped Red Hollow in a hush, its stars sharp against the endless black. Clara felt the weight of the locket and ring like anchors, tethering her to a story that was no longer just Eliza's, but her own. The voice at midnight asterisk in the hollow. My heart, Jonah asterisk, had shifted something in her, narrowing the search to the drifter who loved Eliza quietly. The ring was Caleb's, a claim she hadn't wanted, but Jonah's heart, whatever it was, lay hidden in the hollow, waiting to be returned. Clara's resolve was steady, but a quiet fear curled beneath it. What would she find, and what would it cost? The schoolhouse was a blur of routine, her lessons delivered through a fog of anticipation. The children's whispers had all but stopped, their eyes tracking her with a wary respect. Tommy's latest hint, some say he never left the hollow, had lodged in her mind, a clue that pointed back to the cottonwood tree, the raised earth, the place where the locket hummed loudest. She didn't press him for more, sensing his fear, but his words drove her to act. The hollow was calling, and she couldn't delay any longer. After dismissing the children, Clara decided to seek out one last voice in Red Hollow. Old Mrs. Carver, the town's seamstress, was said to have known everyone's secrets, her needle threading stories as much as cloth. Her small house sat at the town's edge, its porch sagging under the weight of years. Clara knocked, the locket warm against her chest, the ring heavy in her pocket. Mrs. Carver answered, her eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Schoolteacher," she said, her voice soft but knowing. "You're digging where most won't." Clara asked about Jonah, the drifter, and the hollow. Mrs. Carver's hands paused on her sewing, her gaze flicking to the locket. "Jonah was a wanderer," she said, her voice low. "Loved Eliza, with a heart too big for this town. When she died, he broke. Folks say he left, but I saw him, nights after, by that cottonwood tree, talking to the earth like it could answer. Left something there, maybe. Something for her." Clara's pulse quickened. "What?" she asked. Mrs. Carver shrugged. "A piece of himself, I reckon. Love don't die easy." Clara thanked her and left, the locket humming faintly as if confirming the seamstress's words. Jonah's heart was in the hollow, not a ring, but something else, something personal. She waited until dusk, when the town grew still, before slipping out of the boarding house. Widow Hargrove's eyes followed her, but Clara murmured an excuse and stepped into the desert air. The hollow was a basin of shadows, the cottonwood tree a dark silhouette against the sky. The locket pulsed, its rhythm stronger, guiding her to the raised earth. Kneeling, Clara set the ring aside. She knew now it wasn't what Eliza needed. She dug gently, her hands trembling, the locket burning against her chest. The earth was soft, yielding, as if waiting. A few inches down, her fingers brushed something small, wrapped in faded cloth. She pulled it free, a leather pouch. brittle with age, tied with a thin cord. Inside was a folded paper, yellowed and fragile, and a small, carved wooden locket, its surface etched with a tiny heart. Clara's breath caught Jonah's heart. The locket in her hand burned, it seemed glowing silver. She held the wooden locket, its heart catching the moonlight. The air grew heavy, the hum rising from the hollow like a sigh. The silhouette appeared near the tree, the woman in white, her eyes clear now, filled with a quiet relief. "Jonah," she whispered, the voice soft but sure. Clara's chest tightened. This was it, Eliza's heart, Jonah's gift, buried in the hollow. She placed the pouch back in the earth, her hand steady, and whispered, "Is this what you need?" The locket cooled, the hum fading, and the silhouette shimmered, then vanished. The air lightened as if a weight had lifted. Clara stood, the ring and her own locket in her hands, her mind spinning. Jonah's gift had been buried, a secret kept from Caleb, from the town. But was it enough? The voice had said return it, but the silhouette's relief felt incomplete, as if something still lingered. In her room, Clara opened the book, its pages worn from her touch. The story of Eliza, Caleb, and Jonah offered no mention of a wooden locket, but Mrs. Carver's words filled the gaps. Jonah, broken, leaving a piece of himself. Clara set the ring and locket on her bedside table, their weight grounding her. Midnight came, the clock's ticks a quiet summons. She held her locket, the desert a sea of shadows beyond her window. At the stroke of 12, the scene glowed faintly, but no voice came. The silence was heavy, expectant, as if waiting for her next move. In the window's reflection, no silhouette appeared. Clara's heart pounded, the absence unsettling. She whispered, "Eliza, is he done?" But the locket stayed cool, silent. The hollow had given up Jonah's heart, but something was still missing. Clara knew she'd return to the tree, to the earth, to Eliza. The story wasn't over. The next morning, Clara taught her lessons with a quiet resolve, her thoughts on the wooden locket. Tommy watched her, his eyes wary. During recess, she caught him by the steps. "Tommy," she said softly, "what happens if you return the wrong thing to the hollow?" His face paled. "Ma said it don't rest," he whispered. "It keeps calling till you get it right." He ran off, leaving Clara with a chill that settled deep. The desert night cloaked Red Hollow in a stillness that felt alive, as if the hollow itself were listening. Clara's discovery of the wooden locket, Jonah's heart, buried under the cottonwood tree, had brought a fleeting sense of progress, but the silence at midnight left her unsettled. Eliza's voice had not returned, and the absence of the silhouette in her window felt like a pause, not an end. The locket around her neck and the ring in her pocket were steady weights, but the wooden locket, now tucked safely in her satchel, was a new piece of the puzzle, its tiny heart a whisper of Jonah's love for Eliza. Clara knew the story wasn't finished. She hadn't returned the right thing, not yet. The schoolhouse was a quiet refuge, though the children's wary glances followed her. Tommy's words, "It keeps calling till you get it right," echoed in her mind, a warning that the hollow demanded precision. She taught her lessons with a calm she didn't feel, her thoughts on the cottonwood tree, the wooden locket, and what Eliza still needed. The book offered no new clues, its pages worn from her touch, but the story of Eliza, Caleb, and Jonah felt closer now, its edges sharper. Jonah's gift was love, not possession, unlike Caleb's ring. But what did it mean to return it? Clara decided to seek out one last voice, Doc Harlan, the town's aging physician who'd tended Red Hollow's wounds for decades. His office was a small building near the saloon, its shelves lined with bottles and bandages. The air smelled of antiseptic and old leather as Clara stepped inside. Harlan was at his desk, his white hair catching the lamplight. "Miss Everett," he said, his voice gruff but kind. "You look like you're carrying more than lesson plans." Clara smiled faintly and asked about Eliza, mentioning the ring and the wooden locket without showing them. Harlan's eyes narrowed, his hands pausing on a ledger. "Eliza Mayhew," he said, his tone heavy. "She was a light till love snuffed her out. Caleb's ring was a chain, she wore it to keep peace, but her heart was Jonah's. When she died, Jonah came to me, half mad with grief. Said he'd left something for her in the hollow to keep her safe. Didn't say what." Harlan leaned closer, his voice low. "If you found it, girl, you're holding a ghost's wish. Be careful what you do with it." Clara's pulse quickened. Jonah's wish, was that the wooden locket? She thanked Harlan and left, the locket around her neck humming faintly. Dusk fell as Clara slipped out of the boarding house, avoiding Widow Hargrove's sharp gaze. The hollow was a basin of shadows, the cottonwood tree a dark sentinel. She knelt by the raised earth, the wooden locket in her hands, its carved heart glinting in the moonlight. The locket around her neck pulsed, its warmth spreading through her chest. "Eliza," she whispered, "is this Jonah's heart? Is this what you need returned?" She placed the wooden locket on the earth, her hands trembling, expecting the hum, the silhouette, something. But the air stayed still, the locket silent. Then a faint breeze stirred, carrying a hum, not from her locket, but from the wooden one. Clara's breath caught as she picked it up, its surface warm. The silhouette appeared near the tree, the woman in white, her eyes clear with a quiet urgency. "Return it." "To him," the voice whispered, soft but sharp. Clara's heart raced. To him, Jonah? But Jonah was gone, or so the town said. She stood, clutching both lockets, the ring heavy in her pocket. The silhouette vanished, the air lightening, but the hum lingered, urging her forward. Back in her room, Clara set the lockets and ring on her bedside table, their weight grounding her. She opened the book, its pages offering no mention of returning anything to Jonah. Harlan's words echoed asterisk, a ghost's wish. The wooden locket was Jonah's gift, his heart for Eliza, but returning it to him was impossible, unless he was still in the hollow, as Tommy had hinted. The thought sent a chill through her. Was Jonah's spirit tied to the hollow like Eliza's? Midnight came, the clock's ticks a steady summons. Clara sat by the window, the locket around her neck warm, the wooden locket in her hand. The desert was a sea of shadows, the stars sharp above. At the stroke of 12, her locket's seam glowed silver, but no voice came. She held the wooden locket, its heart glinting, and whispered, "Jonah, where are you?" A faint hum answered, not from her locket, but from the wooden one, soft and sorrowful. In the window's reflection, the silhouette appeared fainter, the woman in white, her eyes pleading. Clara turned, but the room was empty. The lamp flickered, shadows curling like memories. The next morning, Clara taught her lessons with a quiet resolve, her thoughts on Jonah and the hollow. Tommy watched her, his eyes wary. During recess, she caught him by the schoolhouse steps. "Tommy," she said softly, "if Jonah never left the hollow, where would he be?" His face paled and he glanced at the locket. "Ma said some folks stay where their heart broke," he whispered. "By that tree, maybe." He ran off, leaving Clara with a chill that settled deep. She knew she'd return to the hollow, to the cottonwood tree, to find Jonah's place. The lockets were her guides, and Eliza's voice was a call she couldn't ignore. Red Hollow was a story, and Clara was its keeper, bound to return a heart to a man long gone. The desert night wrapped Red Hollow in a quiet so deep it seemed to hum, its stars a silent witness to Clara's search. The locket around her neck and the wooden locket Jonah's heart, etched with a tiny heart, were twin pulses, binding her to a story that felt as much hers as Eliza's. The voice's latest plea asterisk, return it. To him asterisk had sharpened her focus to Jonah, the drifter who loved Eliza quietly, whose heart lay buried in the hollow. But Jonah was gone, or so the town believed, and Tommy's words, "Some folks stay where their heart broke," pointed back to the cottonwood tree. Clara felt the weight of time pressing in, as if the hollow were urging her to finish what she'd started. The schoolhouse was a blur of routine, her lessons a mask for the urgency within. The children's eyes followed her, their silence heavy with unspoken questions. Tommy's wariness had deepened, his glances at the locket quick and guarded. Clara didn't press him, sensing his fear, but his hint about the cottonwood tree burned in her mind. She taught with a calm she didn't feel, her thoughts on Jonah, the hollow, and what it meant to return his heart. The book offered no new clues, its pages worn from her touch, but the story of Eliza, Caleb, and Jonah was clearer now, a love broken, a heart buried, a promise waiting to be kept. After dismissing the children, Clara decided to revisit the hollow one last time before nightfall. The cottonwood tree was her guide, the place where Jonah's heart had been buried, where Eliza's silhouette appeared. She slipped out of the boarding house at dusk, avoiding Widow Hargrove's sharp eyes, and walked into the desert. The hollow was a basin of shadows, the hills dark against a sky streaked with fading light. The locket around her neck pulsed, its warmth spreading, while the wooden locket in her pocket hummed faintly, as if calling to the earth. At the cottonwood tree, Clara knelt by the raised earth, the wooden locket in her hands. The air was heavy, the hum rising from the ground like a memory. She placed the wooden locket on the soil, her fingers trembling. "Jonah," she whispered, "is this where you are?" The locket around her neck burned, its seam glowing silver, brighter than ever. She pressed it, her heart pounding, but it wouldn't open. The wooden locket hummed louder, its heart glinting in the twilight. Then the silhouette appeared, not Eliza, but a man, faint and flickering, standing by the tree. His form was blurred, but his eyes were sharp, filled with a quiet sorrow. Clara's breath caught. "Jonah?" she said, her voice barely audible. The silhouette shimmered, then faded, but the air grew heavier, pressing against her. The wooden locket pulsed, its hum blending with the locket around her neck. She felt a pull not to the earth, but to another spot, a few steps away, where the ground was flat, unmarked. Guided by instinct, she knelt there, her hands brushing the soil. It was hard, undisturbed, but the locket's hum urged her on. She dug, her fingers scraping dirt, until they brushed something solid, a small, rusted tin, sealed tight. Inside was a folded letter, its ink faded but legible. Clara's hands trembled as she read, Asterisk Eliza, my heart is yours always. I'll wait in the hollow till you're free. Jonah, asterisk. Her chest tightened. This was Jonah's heart, not just the wooden locket, but his promise, his love, left in the earth where he'd grieved. The locket around her neck burned, it seemed glowing brighter. She placed the letter and wooden locket together on the ground, whispering, Is this it, Eliza? Is this what you need returned? The air lightened, the hum softening, and the silhouette of the man appeared again fainter, but with a quiet peace in his eyes. Clara stood, the tin and wooden locket in her hands, the ring still in her pocket. The locket around her neck cooled, its glow fading. She felt a shift, as if a knot had loosened. The hollow was silent now, the cottonwood tree still against the sky. She returned to the boarding house, her mind spinning. In her room, she opened the book, its pages offering no mention of a letter, but Jonah's words filled the gaps. He'd waited for Eliza, even after her death, his heart buried in the hollow. Midnight came, the clock's ticks a quiet summons. Clara sat by the window, the locket around her neck, the wooden locket and letter before her. The desert was a sea of shadows, the stars sharp above. At the stroke of 12, her locket warmed, it seemed glowing faintly. No voice came, but a soft hum rose from the wooden locket, like a sigh of release. In the window's reflection, no silhouette appeared, only her own face, tired but calm. She whispered, Eliza, Jonah, are you free? The locket stayed silent, its weight lighter now. The next morning, Clara taught her lessons with a quiet ease, her thoughts on the hollow. Tommy watched her, his eyes less wary. During recess, she caught him by the steps. Tommy, she said softly, what happens when you return the right thing to the hollow? He smiled, a rare lightness in his face. Ma said it lets em go, he whispered. They rest. He ran off, leaving Clara with a warmth that settled deep. She knew the story wasn't over, but the hollow felt quieter now, its call softer. The locket was still hers, but its purpose was shifting. Red Hollow was a story and Clara was its keeper, bound to see it through. The desert night lay soft over Red Hollow, its stillness a gentle hand on Clara's weary heart. The locket around her neck, the wooden locket, and Jonah's letter each carried a piece of the story that had woven itself into her days. Finding Jonah's promise in the hollow, buried under the cottonwood tree, had felt like a turning point, a moment when the air lightened and the silhouettes of Eliza and Jonah seemed to find peace. Yet the locket she wore still hummed faintly, its seam unopened, as if one final piece of the puzzle remained. Clara sensed the story was nearing its end, but Red Hollow's secrets were stubborn, and she was still its keeper. The schoolhouse was quieter now, the children's glances softer, as if they felt the shift in the air. Tommy's small smile, "They rest," had given Clara a flicker of hope, but the locket's weight told her there was more to do. She taught her lessons with a steady calm, her thoughts on the hollow, the letter, and the question of what it meant to truly set Eliza and Jonah free. The leather-bound book offered no new clues, its pages silent on the letter, but Jonah's words, "I'll wait in the hollow till you're free," echoed in her mind, a vow that bound them even now. Clara decided to return to the hollow one last time, to the cottonwood tree, to see if the final act lay there. She waited until dusk, when the town settled into a hush, and slipped out of the boarding house, the locket warm against her chest, the wooden locket and letter in her satchel. Widow Hargrove's eyes followed her, But Clara offered no explanation, stepping into the desert's cool embrace. The hollow was a basin of shadows, the cottonwood tree a dark silhouette against a sky fading to indigo. The locket pulsed, its rhythm steady, guiding her to the raised earth. Kneeling, Clara set the wooden locket and let her on the ground, the ring in her pocket a quiet reminder of Caleb's unkept claim. The air was heavy, the hum rising from the earth like a final breath. "Eliza, Jonah," she whispered, "what's left to do?" The locket around her neck burned, its seam glowing silver, brighter than ever. She pressed it, her fingers trembling, and for the first time it gave a soft click, the locket springing open. Inside was a tiny portrait, faded but clear. A woman with storm cloud eyes, her face Eliza's, and beside her a man with a quiet smile, Jonah. Clara's breath caught. The locket had opened at last, revealing its heart. The hum softened, the air lightening, and the silhouettes appeared, two now. Near the tree, Eliza and Jonah, their forms clear, their hands touching. Eliza's eyes met Clara's, filled with a quiet gratitude. "Thank you," her voice whispered, soft as the wind. Jonah's silhouette nodded, his smile faint but real. The locket cooled, it seemed dark now, and the figures shimmered, then faded, the hollow falling silent. Clara stood, the open locket in her hands, the wooden locket and letter on the ground. She felt a release, as if a knot had unraveled. The ring, Caleb's claim, was no longer needed. She left it in her pocket, its weight irrelevant. The hollow had taken back what belonged to it, Jonah's heart, Eliza's love, their story. She placed the wooden locket and letter back in the earth, covering them gently, a final act of return. The desert sighed, the stars brighter now, as if Red Hollow itself were at peace. Back in her room, Clara set the open locket on her bedside table, its portrait glinting in the lamplight. The book lay closed, its story complete. Midnight came, the clock's tick soft, no longer a summons. The locket stayed cool, silent, its purpose fulfilled. In the window's reflection, no silhouettes appeared, only Clara's face, tired but calm. She whispered, "Rest now," and felt a warmth settle deep, as if Eliza and Jonah had heard. The next morning, Clara taught her lessons with a lightness she hadn't felt in weeks. Tommy watched her, his eyes bright, no longer wary. During recess, she caught him by the steps. "Tommy," she said softly, "they're resting now, aren't they?" He grinned, a child again. "Ma said when it's right, the hollow goes quiet," he said, then ran off, his laughter echoing. Clara knew the story was over. The locket was hers, but its secrets were free, returned to the hollow where they belonged. Red Hollow was just a town again, its shadows softer, its air lighter. She was its keeper no longer, but the story would stay with her, a whisper in the desert's heart. The desert night closed around Red Hollow, its silence a gentle embrace. Clara sat by her window, the locket open in her hands, its portrait a final gift from Eliza and Jonah. The hollow was quiet now, its hum gone, the cottonwood tree standing sentinel over love returned. She thought of her own journey, coming to this town, alone, carrying her mother's locket, seeking a new start. The locket had chosen her, not just to teach, but to listen, to carry a story to its end. She closed it gently, its crescent moon glinting one last time, and set it on her bedside table. The desert stretched beyond, vast and calm, its secrets at rest. Clara smiled, her heart light, and let the night guide her home. Not all spirits seek to frighten. Some just wish to be remembered. If their tale lingered with you, let it rest with your breath. Sleep well tonight. And if you hear a whisper in your dreams, maybe it's just the end of the story.